Hi, my name's Doug Dubitsky. If you live in the towns of Chaplin, Hampton, Scotland, the eastern part of Lebanon, the western part of Lisbon, Canterbury, Sprague, the northern part of Norwich or Franklin, then I'm your state representative. Many of you know me already. I have met many people. I meet hundreds of people every year in my district, and I do that because if I represent you, I need to know who you are. I need to know what you want. That's the way I represent people. I have a lot of town hall meetings. I have a lot of coffee hours. My cell phone number is on my business cards. I need you to be able to get in touch with me in order to tell me what you think about what's going on up at the Capitol, issues in the news, things you want me to vote for or against when I'm up at the legislature. And also if you have problems, if you've got issues with state government that I might be able to help you with, I encourage you to get in touch with me. And every 2 years, I have to come before you and ask you if I've done a good job. And now's that time, so I'm asking you if you think that I've done a good job over the last couple of years representing you. I would ask you to go and vote on November 6th and vote for me to continue representing you.
All right. With that, we'll go to some questions. A couple of eye-openers looking at your voting record. I'd like to ask you why you voted as you did.
Sure.
The final bump stock bill, as it came to the House, you voted no.
I sure did.
And wondering why the bump stocks are added to a semi-automatic, to act like an automatic weapon. So, why would you have voted against something like that?
Because it's not a state issue, it's a federal issue. Right now, the federal government is in the process of going through a rulemaking changes with regard to the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And it really should be regulated at the federal level. One of the problems with regulating it at the state level is that we don't have the knowledge or the resources to determine what a bump stock is. Now, you may say, well, everybody knows what a bump stock is. But if you look at the language of how the bill is written, it can be interpreted a number of different ways. And at the federal level, they have the FBI lab in Quantico, where if you've got a device that you own and you want to know if it's illegal, if it fits within the definition of the statute, you can send it to Quantico. They have their experts. They will attach it to a firearm, and they will determine whether or not it is one of the things that is banned or not. Without that knowledge, without the resources, without the lab, we're banning sort of this group of devices, of pieces of plastic, and thousands of people own them, and many of them will not know and will have no way to know whether or not their particular device is perfectly fine or makes them a felon. So I do think very shortly it'll be banned at the federal level. I don't think that this is one of the things that the state should be involved in.
The other issue, arguably controversial, was your vote against the ban on gay conversion therapy. I think you're one of 8 House members that said no to that. What was the reasoning behind that vote?
Well, first off, it didn't ban conversion therapy. It didn't do anything of the sort.
Okay.
All it did was it prevented licensed physicians from having certain discussions with their patients. Now, it may have started out at one point actually banning certain things, but all it did was it got in between a doctor and a patient. And there was testimony about all these horrific instances and all these horrific procedures, electroshock therapy, kidnapping people, beating up people, but none of that was in the bill. Absolutely none of it. So on the House floor, I asked the proponent of the bill, will this ban electroshock therapy? No. Will it ban kidnapping a child to try to do this? No. Will it ban anything that any of these people have said are these horrific things? No. All it does is it prevents a licensed physician from being involved in certain speech. And you guys are journalists. I imagine you have the First Amendment and speech. You cherish it, as do I. This was not a conversion therapy bill. The American Civil Liberties Union opposed this bill for a number of reasons, including that it got in between a doctor and a patient. Also because the licensing boards, physician licensing boards, are a far better place to regulate the types of things that doctors should be involved in, the doctors should be able to talk to their patients about, than state legislators. So, I'm on the side of the American Civil Liberties Union. All these people are screaming that this is this hateful thing that is against gay people. Absolutely nothing of the sort. In fact, the very thing that everybody claims was banned, as I discussed on the floor of the House, could be done on every single street corner in Connecticut as long as it's not done by a licensed physician. So any nonprofit can set up a conversion therapy storefront and bring people in and try to convert them. This bill did absolutely nothing of the sort to ban that. So it was a nonsensical bill with a nice name that the American Civil Liberties Union opposed, and I opposed it too.
Thanks for clearing those two up and,
Sure.
and why you voted as you did. The big issue, I think, once again, is probably going to be the budget and again, facing a projected deficit, $2 billion, about 10% of the budget. Just to kind of bring us up to date, where did you stand, kind of backing up to the final 2-year budget that was approved? The governor, we go back in time, the 2-year spending bill, the governor, the Republicans managed to pass their budget with some few Democratic votes. Governor vetoes that. Subsequently, another budget is passed, which was labeled bipartisan. Where did you end up coming down when that final budget was passed?
I voted against it.
Okay, so could you kind of take us through that? Why?
Sure.
What
Well,
were you worried about?
I was worried about a Hartford bailout of $550 million. I was worried about another thing I was worried about is that the bill came out at 20 minutes after 10 on the last day of the session, and we were expected to vote on it at 11:15. So we had essentially 20 minutes to read a 100-page budget bill. Now, I don't care if that was going to save the world. There was no way I was going to vote for it because I had no idea what was in it, and neither did anybody else. And that's the exact way we got hoodwinked, those that voted for the budget 2 years ago got hoodwinked into this Hartford bailout, because an 800-page bill came out at 10:30 at night, and we were expected to vote on it at 10 o'clock in the morning. Nobody had a chance to read 800 pages of thick budget material overnight before voting on it in the morning. I was sitting there waiting for this thing. I was going to send it to my towns. I had selectmen. I had boards of finance waiting for this thing to look at it, to tell me whether they supported it or opposed it. And all day long, I kept having to send them emails. Not here yet. Not here yet. Not here yet. Then at 10:30 at night, it finally arrived. And they were like, "You got to be kidding me. We've got to read this 800 pages before you vote on it at 10 in the morning." So, that's why we get sandbagged with all this lousy stuff, because of the process.
Mm-hmm. In retrospect, how do you view, you've had probably a chance to see it and what the effects are since.
Well, there were certain things in it that are good. The caps, the budget cap, the volatility cap, things like that are, I'm grateful that those were negotiated into it. Ultimately, I'm not sure whether or not I would have voted for it anyway. But not having a chance to read it, there's no way I was going to vote for it.
So where do we go from here? Going back again, and another deficit. There's restrictions with the labor contract. Says no layoffs, mandates raises, etc. You know better than me probably what you're up against. So what's your thoughts going in? What does the legislature have to do to approach this?
Well, it depends on who the legislature's made up of, and it depends on who the governor's going to be. Since I've been in office, which is only 2 terms, we've essentially done the exact same thing every year: late budgets, lousy budgets, irresponsible budgets, irresponsible budget projections. We just keep doing the same thing over and over and over. And I keep getting up there and screaming about it, as do some of the others, but we simply don't have the numbers to stop it. This year, we had the numbers to pass a budget, but we didn't have the numbers to override the governor's veto. So it really will depend on who the cast of characters is up there. If the same party's in power, the same thing's going to happen. It's inevitable.
And what would you like to see if you were able to become the party in power, or at least have a governor that was of the same party and perhaps more leverage? What approaches would you like to see to change?
Well, I like Stefanowski's plan. I know a lot of people don't understand it and have said that they don't support it, even a lot of Republicans, but they just don't understand the income tax cut plan. It wasn't until, I think it was yesterday, that I finally saw an article that actually explained that he's not planning on just letting loose half of the budget on the first day of his office. I think it's a perfectly reasonable goal to try to generate economic growth with various smaller tax cuts, try to get businesses to come back, try to generate more economic activity. And as we get more growth, then you have an opportunity to ratchet down the income tax a little bit. You set benchmarks for growth. If you reach a benchmark, then you can ratchet back the income tax a little bit. If you don't reach that benchmark, then you can't ratchet it back. That is absolutely a responsible goal and done in a responsible manner. If it were just, okay, we're just going to eliminate the income tax and 40 some odd % of the income to the state, that would be ridiculous. I would certainly not support that. But that isn't the plan. We do need to show businesses and show individuals that they can start a business, that we are not going to keep beating them up. I can't tell you how many businesses have left my district and how many people that own businesses have either left or are desperately trying to leave. And they're trying to go to places that don't have the same policies that we have. They're trying to go to places not just have lower taxes, but lower regulation. They have streamlined their executive branch. So if you own a car dealership and you want to get some cars registered, it doesn't take you forever and cost you a fortune. You can go into a AAA, or in some places you can go into a supermarket and you can get these things done. We make everything in every step of the way just way too difficult for a business to operate. And many businesses these days are mobile. They can go somewhere else. And what's holding them here very often is their love for the area, their children, or some businesses. You can't just pick them up and leave. It takes time and money, and it really is a commitment to do so. But unfortunately, too many businesses are making that commitment and are uprooting and leaving because we are not treating them well.
Mm-hmm. Being a fiscal conservative has been up there now for 4 years. Broadly, are there any functions of government you think that are really overstepping the government's responsibility? Any kind of big picture ideas you would have to kind of do government differently? I think you touched on that a little bit in your last answer.
Sure. The governor is overstepping his constitutional authority. This $10 million toll study, he has no authority to do that. The legislature didn't approve that. He just decided off the top of his head he's going to go ahead and establish policy that this state is going to study the implementation of tolls, even though there were 3 separate bills up at the legislature, and the legislature chose on each one of them not to pursue a study on tolls. The governor just decided on his own he's going to do it. So he has no power to do that. In fact, Joe Markley has sued the governor over that, seeking an injunction to prevent him from spending that money, and I'm one of Joe Markley's attorneys. So we were in court yesterday arguing that the governor had no power to bond for that kind of money and to spend that money. That's taxpayer money. The policy of spending that money is constitutionally assigned to the legislature, and the legislature never decided to spend that money. DMV, I don't know if they overstep or understep their authority, but they are just a horribly run organization, and I would love to see them privatized. I would love to see their functions dispersed to any number of private entities that could do it far cheaper, far more efficiently, and without driving everybody crazy.
It sounds like you feel that tax policy creating fiscal stability is tied closely to the ability for the state to grow economically. Is that
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Companies, families, and businesses need some type of stability. They need predictability. They need to have some idea what it's going to cost to invest $1. So a business needs to have some idea. If they're going to hire somebody, they have to have some idea of what it's going to cost them in wages, in insurance, workers' compensation, mandates, regulations. Businesses need to know before they hire somebody if the cost of hiring that person is going to bring value to their business. And if they have no idea what that cost is going to be from year to year, they hesitate hiring somebody. So that is a job that's not created, that's economic activity that's not generated, that's tax money to the state that doesn't come, because people are hesitant to take a step because they're scared of the next shoe that's going to drop from the legislature. Families too, and the towns. The way that the legislature treated the towns in the last 2 years is just horrific. Towns have statutory requirements as to when they have to submit their budgets, what their budgets have to be, and if the state is going to drag out its budget beyond the statutory limit of when the towns have to present their budgets, how are the towns going to budget if a large portion of their income, which comes from the state, which is ECS money or other types of municipal aid, if they have no idea what's coming in, how do they make a budget? They can't. It's almost like literally like the legislature just didn't care. I represent 9 towns, 9 small towns. I represent Scotland, which has a total population of 1,700 people. The amount of money that they get for ECS, education cost sharing, is literally the difference between staying afloat and dissolving as a town. And there was a time when they were right on the edge, when they weren't sure they were going to be able to survive as a town. And the state was offering some money and then changing the formula and then withdrawing it and then not putting out a budget. And then when we finally put a budget in, then the governor changed it. It is completely irresponsible for a state to run this way, especially when it's got responsibilities to 169 municipalities. And I don't know exactly how many, 160 some odd school districts. So, the first thing that we need is some predictability, and we need towns, we need businesses, and we need families to be able to say, okay, I have an idea what's going to happen next year and 5 years down the road. I'm going to plan accordingly, and I'm going to plan on a trajectory, on a growth cycle. If every year the rug gets pulled out from under you and the rules change, a lot of businesses are saying, you know what, let's go somewhere else where we have a little more predictability.
The Commission on Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth, their proposals, they talked about trimming the income tax rates across the board, condensing them, I believe, but raise the sales tax, create a payroll tax, find $1 billion in savings, about 5% of the budget, and then push for regionalization, push regionalization incentives. Well, what did you think of their recommendations? Did you find anything worth?
There were some nuggets in there.
Nuggets?
Look at the makeup. There weren't any small businesses on it. There weren't any municipal officers, small towns. It was a bunch of guys who run big businesses who got together and put together their best guess as to how to change things. I agree with reducing taxes. I do not agree with compelling regionalization in some things. Certainly, I encourage towns to regionalize services when they can, but you have to be very careful about when Hartford decides that 2 towns or 3 towns or 10 towns are suddenly forced into a marriage that they might not be happy with. I'm all for voluntary regionalization, and I know many of my towns are doing that very thing. They're sharing services, they're sharing equipment, they are working with the COGs, the councils of government in the various areas, to save money and to consolidate services. But I think that those that want to go back to county government would be very unhappy if it actually happened.
I'm asking all the questions, Amanda. I don't know if you got something there you want to.
I have. So you had previously mentioned that you would, support Stefanowski's plan. Not so much, everyone's like, oh, he's just going to completely eliminate the income tax. But you're talking more of like
which was never the plan.
Right. The other plan that people are kind of up in arms about, people on the Democratic side are proposing a $15 minimum wage. Is that a realistic goal for the state? Would you support it if that were to come to your desk?
No.
Okay.
No, I think that right now our minimum wage is much higher than many other states. Mm-hmm. And to increase it by 50%, I think would hurt our ability to attract business. And you look at it from the perspective of a small business. Let's say you have some people who have no job skills. They've never had a job before. They don't even really know how to show up on time, and you hire them at minimum wage, $10 an hour. Maybe you give them a little boost. You give them $11 an hour. You've got people who've been there a couple of years. They're at $13 an hour. You've got some really good people who are at $15, $16, $17 an hour. They've been there a long time. They're really valuable to your company. They add value to your company. And the two kids at $11 an hour, you're basically giving them a job to try to help train them to be good employees. So they're not really bringing you any value. So suddenly the state says, okay, the minimum wage now is $15 an hour. So the kids that bring no value to your company are now getting paid $15 an hour, which means you have to bump up your other employees accordingly. And now you've got people who are not worth $11 an hour. You're now paying them $15 an hour. What's going to happen to those kids? They're going to be cut loose. Those jobs will no longer exist. Those kids will not get an opportunity to learn job skills. My daughter worked during the summer. My daughter is not raising a family. My daughter does not have to pay car insurance, does not have to pay a mortgage, does not have to raise kids. She doesn't need to get $15 an hour. The saying that everybody who works 40 hours a week should be able to raise a family on minimum wage, that's ridiculous. We need a minimum wage to allow kids to get job skills, because if the minimum wage is too high, those kids will never get a job. We need to be able, we're cutting the lower rungs off the ladder and saying you have to start your career in the middle of the ladder. Well, what business is going to hire somebody who has absolutely no job skills at a rate that can support a family? When I started working as a kid, I worked hard. I worked at my dad's construction company carrying bags of concrete. I got paid almost nothing, but I learned how to wake up in the morning. I learned how to get to the job site. I learned how to do my job and not complain unless there was something real to complain about. I learned how to be a good employee. And once I had those skills, then I could go out and get a job that paid a good wage. And once I had enough of those skills and I had some experience behind me, then I was able to get a job where I could support a family. If you say that, well, you must pay somebody to support a family right at the beginning, those kids will never get that experience.
What about a big box store that's employing a bunch of people part-time and not very good salary, and a lot of them are going to the state to get a food card to be able to buy their groceries because they can't buy them on their salary, and kids might qualify for Husky. Isn't the state effectively subsidizing successful corporations' ability to underpay people?
Well, do those people like those jobs? Do those people want to work there? Do those people want to work for the amount of money that they're paid?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Well, if they don't, then they should go and get a job somewhere else where they enjoy working there and they get the money that they want. A lot of those people are retired and they have an option to work in a lot of different places. And, some of those big box stores treat people pretty well, and that's why people go there. If you're retired, you're getting a pension, you're getting Social Security, you may not need a lot of money to support yourself. Maybe you want to take a job just to get out of the house. Everybody's situation is different. I just don't see it as the government's role to say that everybody has to be the same, that we have to raise that minimum to the point where nobody will ever get a job at 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. those are the kids we need to give the job skills to. We need to be able to let people hire these kids so they can get the skills, so they can move on in their careers. Why 15? Why not 30? Why don't we say $30 an hour is minimum wage? Why is 15 the magic number? It doesn't make any sense.
Should there be any floor, a minimum wage floor, or would you just assume the market figures out?
Well, I think there should be something, only because of basically the value of a dollar, and I think that that there should be some basis to say, okay, well, you can't pay somebody 8 cents an hour. However, I certainly understand the argument that if you're offering 8 cents an hour, nobody's going to work there, and you have to raise your salaries to the point where somebody actually wants to do the job. Now, if we had a vibrant economy in this state where people were offering jobs and people had to raise their salaries in order to attract workers, which is what virtually every other state in the nation is right now, except us, except Connecticut, we wouldn't need to raise the minimum wage. It would raise automatically. You just try to hire a plumber in South Carolina. There's so much building going on in a lot of places that they have to pay a lot of money for these jobs, and we don't have that problem here, unfortunately.
Kind of paired with that is paid family leave. That's the other big Democratic talking point.
Yeah. Well, paid family leave, first off, the bill that was in the legislature was going bankrupt from the minute that it would have been signed. There wasn't nearly enough money set aside, because basically what it did was it compelled workers to put in a little bit of money into this fund, and then based on that, they were able to take an enormous amount of leave time and get paid for that time. There wasn't nearly enough money put into the fund to support that. And when you raise that issue, the proponents would say, well, we'll just raise the amount that they have to pay. Okay, so somebody's making, let's say, $15 an hour. They put in their money into the fund. Suddenly something happens to their family and, oh, there's no money in the fund. So where's that money going to come from? Well, it's going to come from one of two places. It's either going to come from the employer, which everybody promised it would never come from the employer, or it will come from the general fund, and the taxpayers will fund it. So, the whole thing was very poorly conceived, very poorly executed, and, simply because it had a name that people associated with doesn't mean that it was a good bill.
Any ideas for people that are in that situation, or is it just up to them to make sure they save enough for the rainy day that comes along when they're going to miss some work?
Well, that's basically the way it is. You rely on family, you rely on friends, you try to have some savings. I've been in situations where I've had to take considerable amount of time off from work, and it is tough if you're not on salary, if you're hourly. My whole life, if I didn't show up, I didn't get paid. It is a tough situation. However, the bill that came before the legislature, that paid family leave bill, was not the answer. Like a lot of bills, it had a nice name, but when you read inside, it isn't what it claims to be. Just like the conversion therapy bill, every year I have a list of the biggest hoodwinks. I actually brought one with me just to show you guys, where there's a bill that has a name that's supposed to do a certain thing, goes through public hearing. Everybody talks about this bill. This is what it does. And then at the last minute, the entire contents is ripped out, something completely different is put in, but it still keeps the same name, right? So I brought one with me, which was a bill with regard to smoking cessation. So it was a smoking cessation bill. Went through public hearing. People came and testified about smoking cessation. People supported it. People signed on to it. And then when it got to the floor, all the smoking cessation stuff got pulled out, and they put in stuff about qualifications of embalmers, people who embalm bodies. So the bill still says, I'll give it to you. I'll show it to you. And this is one of my biggest peeves up there. It's an act concerning the Department of Revenue Service's recommendation for increasing penalties for certain cigarette and tobacco tax violations. All right, and when you read the actual bill, it talks about Connecticut Board of Examiners for embalmers and funeral directors in the Department of Public Health regarding disciplinary actions and funeral directors, because the bill got gutted. Somebody snuck something in there, and a bill that didn't have any public hearing became law under a different name. And that drives me crazy. And that's one of the things that when I see things like that, I send it out to my constituents and I say, here it is again. They are hoodwinking you on this bill. One of the things that drives me crazy up there is everybody does everything based on the title. Title has nothing to do with the bill. And then, I'm sure somebody is going to hit me and say, well, you voted against increasing penalties for tax violations. No, I didn't. That's not what the bill was about. So many of these bills, you'll see my opponent, I'm sure, is going to send out mailers about all these different bills that she says I voted against. They don't do what they say they're going to do. It makes me nuts.
The last thing I want to make sure we're asking everyone, well, actually, there's two other issues. One, tolls. Big debate going on. Everyone seems to agree there are transportation needs in the state. Disagree on how we raise the revenue, where it comes from. What's your position on tolling?
Well, as you can imagine, because I'm representing Joe Markley in his lawsuit against the governor, based on him spending $10 million of $10 million tax dollars to implement a toll study, you can imagine I'm vehemently against tolls.
They could be two different issues.
They could be. They could be.
The fairness of doing any study without.
I am absolutely opposed to tolls. Most of the people I talk to are vehemently opposed to tolls. When they realize what is actually involved, they say, oh, I had no idea it was going to be like that. Here we are in New London. Well, how do you get to New London? You get here by 95, Route 2, Route 395, Route 11. Every one of those will have tolls on them. The most recent plan is 78 gantries on every limited access highway in the state, which is not only those I just mentioned, but also Route 9, 691, 384, 84, 291, every limited access highway in the state. Each one of those gantries costs approximately $5 million is the estimate. My guess is it's going to be twice that. So let's say there are 80 of them at $10 million a piece. That's $800 million just to get the gantries up. The estimate is that it's going to be about $450,000 a day to operate the system. So, that's another, $10, $12 million a year? Actually, it's much more than that. I don't do math well. So just to break even, before we actually can spend any of the money that comes in, some of the estimates are 15 to 20 years just to pay back the cost of putting this system in. And then what they're talking about is approximately 10 to 20 cents per mile added to everybody's bill. So let's say it's 10 cents a mile. So if you travel 20,000 miles a year on your car, so that's another $2,000 right out of your pocket. Now they say, well, everybody, we'll get the people from out of state to pay it all. One thing, you can't do that because it's unconstitutional, violates the Interstate Commerce Clause. The estimates are that at least 70% of all the revenue will be paid by Connecticut residents. 70%. So, it just, in Eastern Connecticut, it makes absolutely no sense for anybody to support tolls. Plus, where is that money going to go? Where does it go right now? Where's the money from the Special Transportation Fund go? It goes mostly to subsidize buses and trains and for debt service. It doesn't go to fix roads and bridges. It's so ironic that the very day that the legislature voted to send this supposed lockbox to the people for a constitutional amendment, for a referendum on the constitutional amendment, that very day they swept the Special Transportation Fund into the general fund. That's what happens all the time. So even if we get tolls, there's no guarantee that money is going to go to roads and bridges. In fact, under state law right now, all toll money goes to the general fund. It doesn't go to the Special Transportation Fund. So when people start hearing the real facts about tolls, they start saying, well, that's very different. That's not what I thought. No, it's not. And people are being deceived.
We're kind of going to be wrap up. I didn't know if you had something else
Okay.
you wanted to get to.
So this race is a repeat of 2016, and it's you against Democrat Kate Donnelly. Is there anything that you're doing differently this time around? Any issues that have popped up in the last 2 years in your towns? It's also a very big district. Or does it vary town to town what people are interested in? Kind of what are you seeing this time around?
It does vary from town to town. I think that the economy is still the biggest issue with everybody. There are some peripheral issues here and there. Up in Chaplain, Hampton, and Scotland, obviously, there's always the perennial Parish Hill issue. There is, in Norwich, there is the issue with regard to possibly taxing nonprofits. There are different issues in different towns. Lebanon's got the issue with regard to the town acquiring part of the Lebanon Green, or maybe the whole Lebanon Green. Each town has its own issues. Franklin is the issue. The big issue is the sewers and the golf course that's being built. And what I try to do is I try to stay abreast of all the major issues in each of my 9 towns. And if there's any way that I can help, often major issues like this involve state regulatory problems. And if there's a problem, for example, with a state approval for maybe the sewers or building a bridge or something, that I try to stay on top of the issue. So if a problem arises, I'm already familiar with it. In Norwich, there's an issue with regard to the transfer of water infrastructure in one of the trailer parks. Unfortunately, I was made aware of that pretty much after it already happened. So, but it doesn't look like there would have been anything that I could do in that instance anyway. So there are a lot of issues in each of the towns, and one of the things that I don't do only during election time, but I do all year, every year, is I go to a lot of events. I go and talk to hundreds of people, and I just go and ask them. I say, what's going on in town? What's the big issue here? I talk to the selectmen. I talk to the boards of finance. I talk to the Lions Club. I just talk to people who are at these events, and I say, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. So that's the only way I can keep abreast of things. It's not like there's there are a lot of newspapers that cover, Chaplin and Hampton and Scotland. You guys do a great job, but it's just a little bit out of your range. Unfortunately the Norwich Bulletin, I hate to see it, but they're not the venerable icon they once were, and it really is a shame. I think they have like 4 or 5 reporters now, where they used to have many, many more. So really, the way I get to know my district is by constantly traveling it and talking to people. I hold a lot of town hall meetings. I hold a lot of coffee hours, and just invite people in and say, "Come talk to me. Tell me what's going on."
All right, thanks for coming in, Doug.
Sure. Well, thank you.